All right. Well, good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be. As you have probably noticed, I'm not here today. Miss Karen and I are moving for the first time in 26 years. We've been packing for several weeks now and are finally moving. We sold our house and are moving tomorrow. It's been an eventful week. As you know, we put our puppy to sleep this week, and so it's been an interesting week. But just wanted to share with you some things today that are very important as we talk about the New South. We talked about lynching, and if you're like me, you're pretty tired of talking about that. The Leo Frank case, and of course yesterday we talked about Emmett Till and the impact that it had on America in 1955 on the heels of the Brown versus the Board of Education decision passed or set down in 1954. And of course, that was an incredibly tragic event. And I know we went through this part of this yesterday, but I just wanted to start here. It's a good place for us to start in talking about the ridiculous. And I mentioned that yesterday. We go from this incredible tragedy, Leo Frank, Emmett Till, to something that is just utterly ridiculous. And that is something that Georgia did collectively as a people in 1917, and it lasted until 1962. So if you do the math, you realize it's 45 years that Georgia uses this ridiculous system called the county unit system. 1917, the Neal Primary Act is passed by the Georgia General Assembly, and basically it took power away from the large urban centers like Atlanta and Savannah, Columbus, Augusta, Macon, all those larger cities, at least larger for that time, in Georgia, and really gave it to the small rural counties that were in Georgia. And again, if you can see on the board over there, Georgia today has 159 counties. It had the same 159 counties in 1917 under the county unit system. Again, each county received 2 unit votes for every representative or every member it had in the House of Assembly. And so since no county had more than 3 members, no county had more than 6 unit votes. And we kind of went through that yesterday. We talked about this chart yesterday that shows the 8 largest counties in 1920 totaled 48 unit votes. The next 30 is only worth 120 unit votes. And then finally, that 121 counties that remain have a total of 242. So a person could win, a candidate could win the smallest counties in Georgia and be elected to state office by a large margin. And basically the inequity comes, the ridiculous part of this is that out of those 38, or within those 38 largest counties in Georgia, you had 2/3 of Georgia's voters. So 2/3 of Georgia's voters live in those 38 counties. The other 121 counties, that's 1/3 of Georgia's voters. Yet a candidate could win those small counties and be elected. And I know we talked about this yesterday. Showed the graph yesterday, and of course, both that chart and this graph are in your notes, so you probably want to be familiar with them. 1917 to 1962, again, that's 45 years. And as a side note, Jimmy Carter, who you know was president of the United States, the only president to serve from Georgia, is elected in 1962. And that is the first year, that was the first election since 1945 that did not use the county unit system. Jimmy Carter probably would have lost that election had it not been for the change in how Georgia elected its officials. And we looked at what that would look like today. If the county unit system were in effect today, what would elections look like? Well, we take Fulton County, which is roughly 500,000 people, a little more than 500,000 people. Under that system, they would have 3 representatives, which means they would have 6 county unit votes. Eccles County, a little over 1,800 people, would have 1 representative. So they'd have 2 voting units or 2 county unit votes. Glasscock and Quitman, a little over 26, a little over 2,400 respectively. Again, like Eccles County, they would have 2 county unit votes. You add those together, and you have about 7,000 people having the same political weight as 500,000. In other words, the votes of these 7,000 people count more than the votes of 500,000 people. And that's the ridiculousness of the county unit system. It effectively took the vote away from black voters. It took the vote away from urban voters and put it squarely in the hands of a minority of farmers, agricultural people, small county folks. Now, 1960-61, there is a Supreme Court case or a case that comes before the Supreme Court called Gray versus Sanders. Sanders is actually the head of the Democratic Party in Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, and that might be wrong, so don't quote me on that. But in this case, the county unit system is challenged. And the Supreme Court rules, it declares that the county unit system is unconstitutional. It's not fair. In the words of Morgan Ingram, who we all know and love and adore, it's just not fair. And the Supreme Court realizes that. Chief Justice William Douglas, or actually Justice William Douglas, he was not chief, said these words in writing the majority opinion. He said that the county unit system violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And if you remember, when we talked about the 14th Amendment, I said that is at the very heart of every civil rights legislation, every civil rights case that came out of the Supreme Court. The 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Chief Douglas, or Justice Douglas rather, stated that the American conception of political equality, can mean only one thing: one person, one vote. When you turn 18, your vote will count just as much as my vote. Your vote doesn't count more, mine doesn't count less. They count the same. Every vote should count. And that's this idea of democracy. That's this idea of political equality. Just because I'm a white man, my vote should not count any more or any less than one of my neighbors who's black, one of the other members of my community who happens to be black or Asian or Hispanic. Our votes count the same. And that's one of the beautiful things about America. That's one of the beautiful things about democracy is the vote, at least on paper, and I don't know if it's reality, but at least on paper, the vote of a poor man counts just as much as the vote of a rich man. Religion, race, gender, socioeconomic status don't matter. Our votes count the same. So we've kind of walked through this. How do you win a campaign? Well, the Neal Primary Act allows the county unit system to be adopted. And if you're a smart candidate, you campaign in the counties that are going to give you the most votes. So where do you go? You don't go to Atlanta. You don't go to Augusta or Columbus or Macon. You go to those small rural counties because that's where the votes are. And who controls the county unit system? Who controls the primary system? That is the Democrats. The Democratic Party is fully in charge of the political process in Georgia. And from your vocabulary words, by the way, you have a vocabulary quiz on Monday. But under the primary system, a political party will choose its candidates to run against the opposing party. So I believe coming up pretty soon, we have midterm elections. I think in November we have midterm elections. And that means that this summer we will have primary elections. The Republican Party will choose their candidates. The Democratic Party will choose their candidates. Well, under the county unit system, the Democratic Party is in control, and they actually create what is called the white primary, or the whites only primary. Black folks aren't allowed to vote within the Democratic Party. And so since the Democratic Party owns the state or rules the state, then whoever wins the Democratic primary is going to be elected to that office. Governor, for example. Gray versus Sanders comes along, and the Supreme Court begins to erode the power of the Democratic Party in Georgia and other southern states as well, but in Georgia in particular. This is a man named Homer Adolph Plessy. And I wish I were here with you to ask you this question, but I'll ask and see how you respond. What do you see in the picture? And some of you are going to say, well, it looks like he's got a tear in his jacket right here, but I think that's just a spot on the photograph, and there's another one right here. He's got a watch chain, which means he's probably got a pocket watch. Some of you are going to say he's white. I doubt that very many of you would say that Homer Plessy is black. But Homer Plessy plays a major role in one of the most important civil rights cases in American history. And Homer Plessy is actually 1/8 black. He lives in Louisiana. He's 1/8 black, which means he's 7/8 white. And he lives in a time where Jim Crow laws rule. And Jim Crow laws are laws that are on the books. They are state laws that segregate schools, that segregate hotels, restaurants, restrooms. If Jim Crow laws still existed, then you and I and your classmates, we would not be all together. Our gathering would look different. Our community, our school community would look different. We would not be able to go downtown and grab a pizza at the Brick together because some of us are white, some of us are black, some of us are Indian, and some of us are Asian, and we would not be allowed to be together. But Homer Plessy, 1892, again, he is 1/8 black. He's 7/8 white. And he is arrested. He's arrested for sitting in a whites-only section of a railroad car. Now, you have to ask yourself the question, after seeing his picture, how did anybody who really mattered, anybody that could make a decision, how did they know that Homer Plessy was 1/8 black? I don't think he was wearing a sign around his neck. He certainly did not look black. He looked white. And so I'm pretty sure that somebody said, hey, that man is 1/8 black. It was planned. It was a design. There was a a plan that was put into place, and Homer Plessy, somebody tells that Homer Plessy is 1/8 black. He's told to move. He refuses, kind of like Rosa Parks. But the outcome is not like Rosa Parks. He's arrested. Well, Rosa Parks was arrested too. And Plessy sues. And his case makes it all the way to the Supreme Court. And this is another one of those instances where the Supreme Court has the opportunity to right something that is wrong, and they don't. Plessy claims that his equal protection, his right to equal protection, has been violated by this railroad company. And the U.S. Supreme Court rules against Plessy, saying that as long as facilities, as long as public facilities are equal, then segregation is legal. And it creates the concept of separate but equal. You can separate white folks from whites, or from white folks, as long as you provide equal facilities. And here's the problem with separate but equal, and you're going to hear me say this, and I hope and pray that you're going to be able to say this as well. Separate but equal is inherently unequal. Separate can never be equal. And I grew up at the tail end of an era when there were segregated facilities, when there were separate water fountains for black folks and white folks. There were separate schools for black folks and white folks. The academy across town was created in 1972 because many white families here in Baldwin County did not want their children going to school with black folks, with black children. I lived in Macon at the time, and I started school in August, or rather September of 1968. Brown versus Board of Education, which is something we'll talk about, had struck down separate but equal. But it took 14 years for Macon City schools to desegregate. So separate but equal becomes a thing. It becomes the law, according to the Supreme Court. There were other things that were going on. We've kind of talked about the poll tax, a tax that is required to be paid by folks before they register to vote or before they vote. And who does that strike from voting? That takes care of the poor blacks and the poor whites. So the poor are eliminated from voting. There were literacy tests. And you can actually go online and look for literacy tests. But let's just imagine that if you're a white man, your literacy test is going to be something that is oh so simple. If you're a black man, it's going to be oh so difficult. And again, that is to primarily strike the poor, uneducated black man from voting. And then they would create inconvenient times to register to vote. Oh, let's register to vote in the springtime. Well, what are farmers doing during the springtime? Black farmers, white farmers, poor folks are planting in the spring, and they can't afford to give up a day or even maybe a couple of hours to go and register to vote, so they don't. And again, it's eliminating people by making it too costly for them to vote. They can't read or write, or it's just plain inconvenient, and so they don't even register to vote. You see the poll tax, that's from 1895. And if you look at it, it's only $2.50. But, a loaf of bread might cost 3 cents. $2.50 is a lot of money. in 1895. So, those are Jim Crow laws. They're aimed at preventing people from voting, primarily black folks. And then, of course, there's still a lot of racial violence. The Ku Klux Klan is very much alive. It is resurrected in 1920, 1921. Stone Mountain, the top of Stone Mountain, the Ku Klux Klan is brought back. And of course, they used intimidation. They would light crosses in people's yards. They would burn churches. They would stand outside of polling places and literally prevent people from voting. They would beat folks. They would murder folks, all intended to scare black people away from voting. The Democratic white primary I just mentioned just a few minutes ago. The Supreme Court had said political parties are private entities. And because of that, because they're not public organizations, constitutional law does not apply to them. Therefore, blacks are not permitted to vote in the Democratic white primary. It's whites only. And since the Democratic Party controls the political process in Georgia, they are the government in Georgia. Black folks aren't allowed to vote. They can vote for a Republican candidate, but a Republican candidate is not going to win. In fact, from 1872, I think, until 1990, there's not a Republican governor in Georgia. Sonny Perdue becomes the first Republican governor in Georgia for well over 100 years. And so this primary election, the Democratic primary, becomes more important than the general election because whoever wins the Democratic primary is going to win the general election. And so what happens by the early 1900s? Reconstruction takes place. The 15th Amendment gives all male citizens, the right to vote. But by the early 1900s, most African Americans are disenfranchised. They don't have the right to vote. Or they have that right, it's a constitutional right, but in reality, they can't vote. They've been excised. They've been cut out of the democratic process. So we talked a little bit about Jim Crow laws a few minutes ago. Jim Crow was not an actual person. It was a vaudeville character, and it was something that became a divisive or derisive term, rather, for a black man. And it comes to mean in Georgia any state law, and not just in Georgia, but across the South, that established different laws for whites and blacks, different rules. And they're based on the theory of white supremacy, that the white race is superior to any other, and because of that, they should control all aspects of society. And it's part of Georgia and the South's reaction to Reconstruction. Again, by 1871, the Democratic Party is back in control of Georgia. I can remember seeing things like this as a young kid. And in this picture, of course, you see the 10-cent sign that says colored admission. Black folks here in Milledgeville could go sit in the balcony at the campus theater, but they couldn't sit on the first floor. And so that was a part of life, this segregated society where black folks and white folks did not mix. White and colored water fountains. Now, if you look closely at that picture, you're going to see something. They're separate, but are they equal? No, they're not. But where does the water come from? Think about it for a second. The water comes from the same pipe. Water comes from the same place. It goes into the same place. It drains and goes right there. So it was a ridiculous thing to separate people based on their race, based on their skin tone, their skin color. But yet, that's the way things worked. When I was in high school, probably the 8th or 9th grade, maybe not quite in high school or a freshman in high school, during homecoming week, we would actually build floats, and on Friday we had a homecoming parade through downtown Milledgeville. Well, one year our class met at the water department right over here by the river, and that's where we built our float. And I can remember in that building that we were in, there was a sign above a bathroom door, and the sign read, "Whites only." I was pretty young. I was about your age. I thought, how ridiculous is that? And I couldn't believe that still existed in 1976, 75, 76. I just couldn't believe that still existed, but it did. It wasn't very common during those couple of years, but it did exist. So we're just going to go through these Jim Crow laws in Georgia. Some of these are just absolutely hilarious, that they would think that folks needed to be separated in these places. But mental hospitals is one of those. Out at the state hospital until it became illegal, black patients and white patients were totally separate from each other. There were black wards and white wards. And what did it matter? Intermarriage was illegal. And if that's the case, if that were the case today, then I would be a criminal because I have performed interracial marriages. It's illegal for a white person to marry anyone but another white person. Barbers, a colored barber, a black barber could not cut the hair of a white woman, or a black hairdresser could not do the hair of a white woman or a white girl. Burial. Now, this is the one that's kind of silly. If you stop and think about it, all of them are silly. If a cemetery is established for the burial of white folks, black folks can't be buried there. Which in Milledgeville is a little different, because if you go to Memory Hill, you're going to find a lot of black folks were buried there, either as slaves or after slavery ended. Restaurants, if your restaurant caters to black folks, white folks can't eat in there. If it caters to white folks, black folks can't eat in there. I mean, it's, and think about that. I'm sure all of you have friends that you go out to eat with that are of a different race than you are. You wouldn't be allowed. Amateur baseball. This is, again, one of those crazy ones. You couldn't play baseball if you were a white baseball team within 2 blocks of a playground that was devoted to black kids. And the reverse was true. Just crazy. Parks, the only colored folks that could enter a white park were nannies, people that were taking care of white children. And then wine and beer. If you sell wine or beer, you have to sell it to black folks or white folks. You can't sell it to both. Again, ridiculous. So, 1954. In 1954, there's a Supreme Court case, and again, this is the year before Emmett Till is murdered. 1954, the NAACP is allowed to argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. And it became known as, or it was known as, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. That's where it takes place. There's a family. Their name is not actually Brown, but that name was used to kind of protect the family, who sues because their child is not allowed to attend a school that is very close to their home. It happens to be an all-white school. The case gets bumped up to the Supreme Court. goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court issues what was really a surprise ruling. It says that segregated schools were unconstitutional, that separate but equal was inherently unequal, that it violated the 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause. And so that is a landmark case in U.S. history. For the first time, segregation, the idea of separate but equal, is struck down. And it's been in place since 1892. It's been in place for 62 years. And the Supreme Court strikes it down. Well, what did I do? I made a boo-boo. But I undid my boo-boo. Okay? So, Supreme Court rules that the Equal Protection Clause has been violated. And of course, black folks all through this time are responding to Jim Crow laws. They're responding to segregation. Booker T. Washington, who you see in the picture here, his response was very different from most black folks. He thought that the way for black people to advance was not through integration. In other words, leave the races separately or separate. The way for black people to advance was through hard work and vocational education. In other words, we're going to teach people a trade, how to farm, how to work in a factory. He attends the International Cotton Exposition in 1895 and delivers a speech that endorses segregation and pushes for hard work. And that is the path to racial equality. In 1901, he becomes the first African American to visit the White House. And if you've ever heard of the Tuskegee Institute over in Tuskegee, Alabama, that is a school that was established by Booker T. Washington. It was to train farmers and different trades, equip people for different trades. W.E.B. Du Bois, who we talked about on Wednesday in Today in Georgia History, believed that African Americans should speak out for equality, that black Americans should speak out for civil, social, and political rights. And he didn't think too highly of Booker T. Washington. He thought Washington had been too quick and too willing to compromise the rights of black folks. Again, as you heard on Wednesday, he taught at Atlanta University. He is the founder of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, whom I'm sure most of you have heard about. If not, you need to Google the NAACP and learn a little bit of its history. Its purpose is to challenge Jim Crow. Its purpose is to challenge disenfranchisement and segregation. We talked about W.B. Du Bois. He founds a movement called the Niagara Movement. And it was just a group of people who met in Niagara, New York, to come up with a list of demands. Some of those are a call for the end of segregation, a call for the end of discrimination. Du Bois actually is the founder of the NAACP in 1909. And of course, the NAACP worked for the rights of colored folks here in America and continues to do that. It's an organization that still exists, working for the rights of blacks and African Americans. W.B. Du Bois actually leaves Atlanta University, moves to New York, and devotes his full time to that work. The National Urban League is founded in 1910. It's kind of an interesting organization. It focuses on the city, and it works to improve the lives to solve problems of the folks that live in different cities. If you moved from the south to the north, the first people you would want to contact would be the Urban League. If you moved to Chicago or New York or Detroit, one of the big urban areas in the north, you would get in touch with the Urban League. In fact, they would be waiting on you at the train. Here's the NAACP. I don't know what year that is, but you do see, I don't know if Dr. Du Bois is in there or not, but you see the logo for the NAACP there on the right. This is the National Urban League logo. And when you drove in on the train, there at the train station would probably be people that were handing out cards like this. This one's from Chicago. And you can read it. If you're a stranger in the city, if you want a job, if you want a place to live, if you're having trouble with your employer, if you want information or advice of any kind, call upon the Chicago League on Urban Conditions Among Negroes. It gives the address, the phone number, and the person you want to get in touch with. And what are they going to do? They're going to help you. They're going to help you find a job if you don't have one. They're going to help you find a place to live. They're going to help you with whatever trouble you might be having. So it's kind of a neat organization. Still exists. The Niagara movement, you see the historical markers, kind of the forerunner to the NAACP. And you can see the folks that were at that first meeting. And it's interesting. You see Dr. Du Bois down in the front, in the middle. It's interesting that not everybody that attended the Niagara movement, the Niagara meeting, was black. That's something that a lot of folks don't realize. But there were white folks that worked with black folks to try to end segregation, to try to guarantee that black folks in America had their civil rights. You really don't hear about it until the late 1950s and 1960s, but it's always been the case. A couple of people that are fairly important, John Burns and Lugenia, John Hope and Lugenia Burns Hope. First of all, do not ever name your child Lugenia. I will come back and fight you. John is actually from Augusta, Georgia. He's one of the early civil rights leaders. He is the president of Atlanta University. That should ring a bell. W.E.B. Du Bois taught at Atlanta University. And he believes a lot like Du Bois does. He says, he claims, believes that African Americans, black folks, should actively work for equality instead of waiting for it to come to them through hard work and determination. They should go out and claim it. He's part of that group that organizes the NAACP. His wife, Lugenia, is very practical. She is working in Atlanta. She's in the black community of Atlanta. And she is trying to help improve the sanitation, improve the roads, healthcare, and education. And so she's very practical. She's a realist. She knows that folks aren't going to go out and work for the rights that they should have if they're worried about healthcare, if they're worried about education and that sort of thing. The Atlanta Mutual Insurance Company is a company that eventually is owned by Alonzo Herndon. Alonzo Herndon, if you can remember back to the race riot of 1906, it's Alonzo Herndon's barbershop where the front window is broken and two barbers are dragged out in the street and murdered. He was a barber. He started out as a barber. And was very successful. He cut black men's hair. He cut white men's hair. It didn't matter. Alonzo Herndon initially was considered to be the best barber in Atlanta. And as he opened more and more barbershops, that reputation went with it. In 1905, he bought an insurance company. And he did good things with that insurance company. He focuses on African Americans. Most African Americans didn't have insurance, life insurance or property insurance, couldn't afford it, didn't really understand insurance. And Alonzo Herndon fills a niche. And today, the Atlanta Insurance Company, or the Atlanta Mutual Insurance Company, rather, is one of the largest African American owned businesses in the United States. The last statistics I found, and I'm sure that it's gone up, is sales of over 200 million in 17 different states. Now, you can't talk about rights for Black Americans and not talk about rights for women. The big right that women do not have early in the 20th century is the right to vote, suffrage. At Seneca Falls, New York, there's this famous meeting of the suffragette movement, the movement to gain the right to vote for women. In 1920, the 19th Amendment finally gives women the right to vote. Georgia does not ratify that amendment. In fact, it's not until the 1970s that Georgia gets around to ratifying that amendment. Imagine that. But also, remember, Georgia, Thomas Hardwick appoints Rebecca Latimer Felton to be Tom Watson's replacement in Congress in 1922. But yet Georgia did not ratify the amendment. Did that mean women in Georgia could not vote? No. It just means that Georgia did not ratify the amendment. President Woodrow Wilson was, of course, in office, and he is pushed to support women's suffrage. Actually, by this time, Woodrow Wilson is suffering from the effects of a stroke, and it's his wife that actually helps make a lot of decisions. So Woodrow Wilson comes out as supporting women's suffrage. And again, you can see in 1920, August 18th, 1920, U.S. women get vote. And Tennessee is the state that puts it over the top. All right. So the New South, there's a lot of change that takes place. Reconstruction, of course, is a part of creating the New South, has a tremendous impact on that. And it kind of sets us up for what comes next. There's all this change, but there's more and more change to come, particularly when it comes to relationships between Black and white in Georgia, the rights of Black men in Georgia, the whole civil rights thing, Martin Luther King Jr., and I know you've been reading a lot of Dr. King's writings, and I hope you're finding those interesting, and I believe they'll be beneficial to you at some point in time. So have a good rest of the day. We're gonna stop this right here, and I will see you Monday. Don't forget, you have your vocabulary quiz